Good day, James. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today, sir?
I'm good. Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is I really appreciate it. This is really exciting for me because I've been into nutrition. I do most general public, but I work with a handful of fighters. I was a fighter myself. That's what got me into the sport was box, or got me into fitness was boxing. So it's really exciting to have on, more of a coach that works with fighters. So why don't you tell people more about yourself, like how you got into who you are and how you got to do what you're doing now?
Okay. Yeah, well, I am a nutritionist. I mostly work with fighters and I'm a fighter myself. I do Muay Thai. And I've been training Muay Thai for about 13 years now. And that was, so that was since I was young. And then the nutrition sort of as I've got a little bit older, once I finished uni, I studied psychology at uni. And then after that, that was where kind of my nutrition and Muay Thai careers kind of cross paths. And now I'm a nutritionist mostly for not necessarily just fighters, but most of my clients will train combat sports, whether that's, just for fun a few times a week or if they're, high level fighters.
That's great. It's really cool how kind of all came together, and nutrition is so needed for fighters, right? I think that's a major thing. I'd just be curious know a bit more on your journey, because you probably saw a need for it, right? That's what I always saw when I was doing. When you're in fighting, Muay Thai is probably similar to boxing, that it's so traditional that it's not scientific. Like it's not, they hate current research on anything, and they actually hate it when you bring that up. So when I was going to kinesiology and then I was in boxing, and it's like, man, these people don't understand it. So I'm curious about what really intrigued you about trying to get on that side of the nutrition coaching.
I think it was seeing, like you said, like the state of it, the state of like nutrition and boxing. It's pretty much like most boxers, same with Muay Thai, they're both like pretty deep rooted traditional sports. Fighters will just get their nutrition advice like from their trainer or just whatever their teammate is doing, which is just whatever their previous trainer taught them. And it's just been kind of like passed down, without any, yeah, like you said, like without any kind of understanding of the science and the research. And I think for myself, just like not only being interested from a selfish perspective, like to cut weight easier myself and improve my own performance, but also just seeing like the knowing the advice that I was getting from coaches at the time, and like seeing what other teammates are doing, and like really suffering to lose weight and then do the weight cut in the last week and then having that hamper their performance, and just thinking like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And obviously there was. And so when I started working with fighters, like very small things, like there are a lot of like very easy, very quick fixes. And I've had comments like say like, oh, it's like black magic. They can't believe that their weight has, suddenly dropped by 3-4 kilograms in fight week without doing any sweating. Whereas before they were just, dehydrating themselves throughout doing that. And yeah, it's just, there's a lot of easy fixes basically, because the current state is not great.
It's really difficult. Like you said, it's that hand down knowledge. I think that's a great way that you kind of were orchestrating it. Your coach will say, oh, I did this, so you got to do this. It's like they do the same thing with strength and conditioning work. If you have a coach who didn't do strength training, he'll tell you that it's terrible for you. And like, I'm curious though, because I didn't really have too much from my coaches tell me what they thought about nutrition. I was at least into the weeds of it already. What kind of like bad strategies did you hear? I'm just curious because I didn't even hear them other than people maybe tell you to eat salads and cut carbs. So what kind of bad strategies did they give you back in the day?
Yeah, not necessarily from my coaches. I don't want to drop anyone in it, but generally what I've heard from like the experience of clients who've come to me and stuff, there's been all sorts of terrible things. Like one thing that's very common is in fight week, so for that final weight cut, making no changes to the diet and just losing all of that weight via sweating, via dehydration, which is very dangerous, rather than like, being able to manipulate your carb intake, fiber, salt, fluid intake, and things like that. And then the sweating is like, that's the last little bit. That shouldn't be the whole weight cut. Things like having like really restrictive meal plans in fight camp, even for like junior athletes and youth athletes, having like these horrible, horrendous, like bodybuilder style diets that are really low carb, and it's like you've got a list of like 5 or 10 foods that you can eat, and for anyone that would be horrendous, but for someone who's like 14, 15, 16, like that's just so damaging to their mental health as well. All sorts of terrible things, like low carb is quite a common one, and sort of I feel like, especially over the last few years, the culture is changing a little bit. I don't know if it's just like because I'm involved as a combat sports nutritionist that I see more of that. But from my perspective, it seems like more fighters are hiring nutritionists, and it's slowly improving as you start to see like the top level guys having nutritionists, having strength and conditioning coaches, which like maybe 5-6 years ago when I started definitely wasn't the case. So it's heading in the right direction slowly. But yeah, slowly would be the operative word there.
Yeah, it's a slow acceptance, I think, realization, especially when you hear these anecdotes of like, hey, I don't have to sweat it out, doesn't have to be miserable. There's difficulty in fat loss dieting, but nothing compared to that extent. And I got to fully admit, I actually was not as bad possibly as some coaches when it comes to water loss, but I did not know how to manipulate carbohydrates in water as nearly as much. And so I was honestly just other boxers teaching me basically like what's an appropriate rough sweat out range is all we knew. That was kind of our gym culture. And I actually kept that forward as a coach. It's like, as long as it's not too many, and based on my experience, like this was like my own fault, where I was like, okay, if I was like 180 pounds, losing 4 pounds of water, I could do that in a workout. And it was tolerable. So it wasn't terrible, but it's like, if I could do that, like just through diet and salt intake and carb intake, which my powerlifting coach recently showed me, I was like, oh, wow, this is a lot easier. You don't have to tax the guys so much. So it's so helpful that you're able to provide that, because there's already so many taxing things that fighters have to go through. So let's kind of start off with a perception for fighters to be aware of, and people who are, because I do have a few listeners that are into boxing and stuff like that. What's a realistic, range? How should they plan it? And I think where we can start off with, because I get this question a lot when people get into the sport and they have a lot of weight to lose. How do they know what's a good weight to fight at, right? That's even the real first thing to dig into.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a super common one. And the best way generally is to sort of flip things on their head. So normally people think, right, I'm just going to lose as much weight as I can, and then in fight week, I'll just cut a few kilograms or pounds or whatever from that. But the better way to do it is to sort of reverse engineer it. So think about the weight class, how close to the weight class you would need to be by 1 week out to make that weight cut, and then to work out either how much weight you need to lose per week. And if that is too much, then maybe saying, right, don't take a fight in like 4 weeks, maybe extend that to 8, 12 weeks or whatever, so you can actually lose weight sustainably and you don't have to just crash diet yourself into the ground to do that. And, it depends whether it's someone who is coming from like being overweight and they've been through a weight loss journey and they want to challenge themselves by taking on a fight. That would be different to someone who is like perhaps or like already competing and they want to know like, okay, the weight I'm competing at, is that optimal? Is it not? And, it's impossible to give it an exact number. But it is like a lot of things in life, it's on this kind of like bell-shaped curve, where if you fight at a weight class that is too low, so like you're having to like really starve yourself in fight camp to get anywhere near it, and then do a big weight cut in fight week, yes, you might be bigger than your opponent, but there's no point in being bigger if you like gas out in round 1 and anytime you get touched on the chin, like you get dropped because your brain is still dehydrated because you've cut too much. On the flip side, a too small cut where maybe you're just like not even like dieting over camp, just sort of eating normally and not cutting anyway in fight week, your opponent might be cutting like 5 or 10 kilos to make that weight, and like you might be feeling like fresh and good because you haven't depleted yourself at all, which is great. But if you're fighting someone like 5 or 10 kilos heavier, they're going to be bigger than you, stronger than you, probably taller than you as well, and that's also not great. And so the sweet spot kind of lies somewhere in the middle of that. And I know it's a kind of subjective thing, but yeah, with most things, the optimal is found like in the middle ground between the two extreme ends.
It's a great way to describe it. I saw your post on that, and you had another really great phrase that it's not so much that you always want to do it to be the bigger. You do it as kind of the circumstance of the sport that most people are trying to water cut, most people are trying to weight cut, and you don't want to be the smaller person. And there is sometimes I've seen some fighters that just can own their weight class. And I think in some weight classes, like I remember a guy who's walk around 165 and he would fight at 165 and he didn't feel like it was an issue for his weight. And I'm like, that's actually a great place to be. Like, but not everyone can do that. If you're a taller or shorter fighter, that's going to be, different for you, right? Because if you're in a weight class and you're always smaller, right, then you're always shorter than people, and you're going to want to have more power or get to a lower weight class. So it's all relative there for sure. What I'd be curious is if you could even like ballpark, and let's talk more athletic, because it is totally true that you're going to have these people who are trying to do a fat loss journey, and that's going to be super subjective, right? Because I mean, we could just throw out, lose 10% body fat if you're coming from way up there. But if you were to say body fat percentage, let's say for males, where do you think could be somewhere near, on average, peak performance? And again, I know it's going to vary because some people walk around at 10%, you can get them to 5%, but do you think that 5 to 10% is optimal for most fighters? Obviously in heavyweight classes, that's going to be an exception.
Yeah, exactly. Generally, if I was to throw some numbers out there, and there are people who absolutely perform better outside of these ranges, with that just caveat, for males, the sort of ideal body fat percentage, if you want to call it that, would be somewhere between probably about 7 to 12% body fat. Exactly as you said, you're spot on that. Like once we get up to heavyweight, they're going to be heavier, they're going to be higher body fat percentage than that, and that's completely fine. And then so 7 to 12% for males. For females, women naturally carry more body fat, and so that would be 16 to 22% for females. But the huge caveat that I always want to give around body fat percentages is not only like one of their huge individual differences. Like I've had clients, very rarely, these kind of freaks of nature, born to be an athlete, who can just like walk around at like 5, 6, 7% body fat, like pretty much naturally. And so, yeah, that would be technically slightly below the optimal range, but they're naturally, that's fine. I've also had people who naturally just carry a higher amount of body fat, like just their genetic combination, their appetite, their food noise, just lead them to generally be at a higher body fat percentage. And if that means that they're fighting at like 13, 14, 15% body fat for males, or a little bit higher than that for females, then that's completely fine. And these can be like starting points. Like if someone wants to lose weight, they want to fight, and they're like 20% body fat, it's going to be a case of, okay, we're probably going to reduce that body fat, because the reason we want generally like lower body fat, to favor lower body fat, is that muscle can produce force and body fat can't. So beyond like a certain basic like amount needed to like survive and just feel good and not have to starve yourself, it's like sort of dead weight. And again, that doesn't mean that like the less is the better. So yeah, I wanted to give that caveat around like, yes, their numbers and individual differences matter a lot. And then the second thing is like, it's so hard to measure body fat. Like, yeah, we can all like step on our like bioelectrical impedance scale at home and it'll chuck a number out. That could be like 10% off, It could say, you could be 7% and it could say you're 17%, or, vice versa. And so there's that. Like in-body scales, they can still be like, I can't remember, that is still the same method of BIA, where they like shoot an electric kind of pulse through you. But yeah, still huge ranges of error. Even with things like DEXA, it can be up to like a 3 to 5% error. So while I think it's useful to have a rough idea of these body fat ranges, I think like the methods we have like at the moment for measuring it are just so like inaccurate that it's not worth putting too much stock in it. And with my clients, I rarely think like, okay, what's the exact body fat percentage or whatever. It's more kind of like intuitive, and it's about like how they're feeling. yeah, how they're feeling, how they're performing, like their levels of like fatigue. And over the years, like you kind of just get like a sense of things of when it might be like, okay, pushing lower than this, the juice isn't going to be worth the squeeze, you know? So it's kind of, yeah, it's an art and a science.
Well, absolutely. And coaching always is. And as you mentioned, those are major, major caveats that like it's going to depend on the person, because you got people at either extremes. As I mentioned, you know, even some people are like, hey, I'm good at my weight. I don't got to go up or down. That's a great place to find yourself. And it's very challenging to get consistent measurements. And I didn't realize DEXA was that high. I knew DEXA was actually like not even consistent, and skin folds is all over the place. And
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, I think the reason why I like skin folds for some clients is giving them just a tool. It's at least a bit more of a tool to feel good about progress. But if you don't feel good in there, it doesn't matter. Like, and actually, even one of my fighters, that's like, we haven't done a skin fold because we found his weight classes, and we kind of bounce back and forth depending on the opponent, because, you know, he fought recently at 165. Power was an issue, but he's fought at 165. Power was an issue depending on the opponent. And so he can also cut down, but then, which I want to get to, is the cut down to 154 has mental challenges, right? So you always want to find that kind of, like you mentioned, that in between balance. You mentioned something really important there too, was I love how you kind of predicted this, the kind of the water cut the week prior. So you got to think about not just like where your fight weight is, but you actually have to be a certain percentage above that weight 1 week out. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And then that's where you're going to do water manipulation, food manipulation, and things like that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So taking people on that journey prior to that, because you have that 4% range, what is an appropriate, you know, body weight reduction you see per week that you're okay with a fighter planning on? And like, what's a little bit too fast? Because I've had this issue with fighters where it's like, okay, if we do this, you know, half a pound per week, we'll be good. But then they, just like a kid not doing his homework until 2 to 3 weeks out, they push it. And so then they got to do extra cardio and stuff like that. So what do you think is a real safe and still allowing really good performance?
So generally, the ideal would be about 0.5 to 0.75% of your body weight per week. That is great. That will allow you to have like a great fight camp where you're eating a decent amount. You're having to only be in like a few 100-calorie deficit there. That's the ideal situation, and that's what I try to aim for with all my clients. Yeah, 0.5, 0.75. If you do the maths and your weekly weight loss is working out to that, then you're golden. You're great. Then that would be like, you know, top tier, perfect tier, like an A+ or whatever. And then sort of 0.75 to 1% is still, I would class that as we're getting more towards like moderate now, as we head closer to 1%, and 0.5% of your body weight would be like mild. And 0.75 to 1% is like towards the faster end of what I'd recommend. But if we lay out a client's plan and it's like, you know, 0.8, 0.9, or even 1% of their body weight per week, it's like, it's a little bit faster than ideal, but you know, it is still good. It's still pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's still, you know, good to great. When it starts to get too fast is beyond 1% per week. So if we're in that like 1 to 1.5% of your body weight per week, that's too fast, really. You're not going to be able to eat enough calories and carbs to fuel your training like in a decent way. And once we get beyond that 1% body weight loss per week, that's where, I don't know if you can hear my cat.
I heard that, yeah.
That once we get like beyond that 1% body weight per week up to like 1.5%, that's where we're like, yeah, at a risk of like low energy availability, because you remember like fighters are training like at least once a day, twice a day, most days, like expending 1,000+ calories per day. And then you've got someone who's like, you know, 75 kilos eating 1,500 calories a day. Like they're just putting their body into such a depleted state. So yeah, more than 1 to 1.5% too fast. And then any more than 1.5% per week is just like, don't do, basically.
Yeah, it's just so unfortunate that fighters don't know the cost of it. And I know you mentioned this in one of your posts, and I'd seen it firsthand. He wasn't working with me at the time, but he was a former client, and um, he got put down way too easily. And it was just like one random shot. And I actually talked to him, I think, right before the fight. And I had asked him how much weight he lost. And I couldn't tell you what the percentages, I'd have to think about it, but it was like 20 pounds within a month or so.
Yeah.
And he did not have that kind of weight to lose. And sure enough, it was just a random overhand. And I've seen that guy go toe to toe within like 3 days notice of a fight with a guy 10 pounds heavier and take all the shots. So what fighters aren't aware is that your nervous system is not going to be okay with taking hard shots when you're deprived of nutrients. Like, it's just not okay with it. And I mean, I didn't even realize that until I started seeing it in people, and I hear, UFC fighters and coaches talk about it. So it's such a risk for you in the actual event. I was curious because I'd seen this work out once with an athlete, like trying to plan the weight cut so well in advance that, and it was kind of unintentional. What ended up happening was he ended up switching weight classes. It was a fighter who had to go from 154, come back up to 165, so he actually could refeed. And the really cool thing is, like, so he went from trying to do an aggressive fat loss to, okay, now we're trying to gain weight to make you feel better. His energy levels just went through the roof, right? But then because he's reverse dieting, his metabolism's keeping up. It was actually hard to gain weight. And then it kind of dawned on me to have, not to force people below and up, but to get people to, hey, can you lose weight and be at your weight like 2 to 3 weeks in advance? Because, and I was just curious if you've ever experimented with this, because you're recovering better, right? Like, you're not in that, you're at maintenance calories for like a week prior to even getting into it. That's just more optimal recovery. Do you implement that at all?
I've definitely tried it in the past, and yeah, if it's doable, that is a great place to be in, where you can have them on maintenance like a week, 2, 3 weeks before the fight, and sort of front load the weight loss, so the weight comes down, and then it's like, okay, we're within that, like, whatever, 4 to 8% out from the weight class for a day before weigh-in. We're there, stay there, and we'll just like bump up your calories by a lot to maintain that weight. And that, if it's possible, it won't always be possible, because sometimes you're cutting things finer, and like the trade-off to lose that weight earlier might mean like, okay, you're pushing into like a too aggressive weight loss now. But if it's doable, then yeah, that is a great scenario. And I'm actually doing that with a client of mine at the moment. They had a fight booked, got to the event and it got cancelled, unfortunately, which is a real bummer. But credit to them, their dedication and just commitment. They had another fight rebooked for like a month later, but they're already at their weight now, like their 1 week out target weight. So just over this next month, we're just maintaining their weight. Like, they've gone up like 700, 800, 900 calories. And just from our last check-in, they were like, I've not felt hungry like at all, feeling insane in training, like just feeling great. And this, for so many fights, that's like such an unfamiliar feeling, to be like eating like 2,500, 3,000 calories during fight camp and like smashing training, rather than eating like 1,800 and just feeling pretty depleted. So if it's possible, then yeah, that is a fantastic idea.
And it's so interesting because it just on paper makes sense, and you can tell me from working with more fighters, I just think like in the practice, it's just so hard for fighters to own that, to get them to actually experience that. Because what you just mentioned, that sounds like a place you want to be. Hey, you could be 3 weeks out of your fight, smashing a ton of food, like you're amazed you can eat this much food and not put on weight and feel great in the gym. And you tell that to a fighter, hey, this is what we're gonna do, this is what we're gonna do. But you're telling him to this fighter 8 weeks out, 10 weeks out. And so you're hoping that they're going to start, they got to implement it like it's 6 weeks out, and they don't. And so like, I feel like that's the hardest part that I've tried to really reinforce in fighters, like, do it now. But just like every other human, if it's not on your front door, it's not real, right? It's just totally not evident. And like I say, a kid doing schoolwork the night before, unless that narrow window, okay, we got to now. That's like totally in the conscious, or the way that the mind works for so many people. Do you feel like that's part of the reason why you have a hard time with fighters to apply that?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. It's simply like the, there's the deadline is too far away, you know, and like, there's just not that, like dieting is hard. Even if you're doing everything right, like dieting is hard. There's no bones about it. And so when it's like, I could just like do my normal approach and just lose that X amount of weight per week, instead of like having to diet a little bit harder now, it's like, yeah, the trade-off, even subconsciously, is sometimes not worth it. And so, yeah, it's one of those things where, like, in a perfect world, like if we were just designing plans for robots, like without any consideration for psychology, yeah, I definitely consider trying it. But for humans, yeah, this brain gives us some issues with things like that.
Yeah, and there's also even the challenge, you never know when you're going to fight, right? There's also like some guys get a fight planned 4 weeks out. Sometimes it is 8 weeks out, but it can also be the planning challenge, but it is just being human. So I totally respect that. And I love that you keep coming back to the psychology, which I want to dive into. But let's also talk about, because we're talking about like that big plan, help people. What do you think fighters really miss when it comes to the types of foods and, you know, how to go about that? Where do they go wrong?
I would say it's an over focus on the types of foods, or like an over focus on specific foods. Like they'll see, I don't know, a video on Instagram or whatever of, I can't, like, for whatever reason, I can't get them out of my feed. Is like those like cutting board videos with like steak, eggs, and avocado, like, and they'll see like some guy holding that up and he's like just completely shredded, you know, and they're like, oh, it's the steak and eggs and avocado. That's what I need to eat. That's why I'm not shredded. Or, you know, it will be any of the, you know, endless list of diet fads that will like specifically like point out certain foods, but like, you can't eat this. This is poisoning you, or blah blah blah, or you have to eat this if you want to get lean. And I think fighters over focus on like, that's the food, you know, that's the specific food. Whereas like food choices do matter to some extent. Like, okay, for example, like boiled or steamed potatoes is going to be more filling than white rice, for example. And then, you know, those whole food like carb sources are going to be more filling than just like honey. Yeah, sure. But like there's no magic foods really. And I think, yeah, it's a over buying into stuff they see on social media.
I completely agree. We're in a pretty, I don't want to say we're in a rough age, because nutrition, I think, always had its own challenges, like even beforehand, right? I think coaches knew less about nutrition. So I can't say, you know, the former age was necessarily easier, but we are in a unique age that information is more saturated. And I think it's because our attention is saturated, right? So there's certainly, I always say, like, there's so many people who need help out there. So I don't think there's too many coaches, but with online, having so many people having access to, you know, the information, it's a saturated market for attention. And if you say, like, you have the cutting board and you're shredded, you say ridiculous things, saying anything fucking modest doesn't matter. If you say anything that's logical and clear cut and has been said for the last 10 to 20 years, scroll. It's like, and especially because it's not entertaining. Like I literally will be like, oh yeah, this guy says what I already think. So I'm like not as excited, right? And I'm even in support of it a lot of the time. Then there's also just like when someone's looking for it, they're looking for a shortcut. Classic, right? You know, so if it's like that thing, oh, this is the thing, and it takes responsibility away from the person because they now feel like they're finding the secret they're missing. So that's a huge challenge. Now, when you work with fighters, and so you get them to try to sort out their diet, especially I've seen in this a lot. I find it's more interesting with fighters, especially because some of them can be smaller. So, but they still have weight to lose. They're so unaware of macronutrients and stuff like that. How do you help them with this? Do you get them to track? Do you give them rough meal plans, somewhere's in between? Because I feel like there's a real lack of awareness when it comes to the macronutrients when it comes into food for fighters.
Yeah, definitely. I've tried a few different approaches over the years, and the one I've kind of settled on is, yes, tracking food, but a kind of flexible approach to that with the assistance of some example days as well. Because I think, like, if someone's never tracked their food and you tell them, okay, eat 2,000 calories, 150 grams of protein, it's like, what the hell? How do I do that? I don't eat like calories, I eat food, you know? And so I think it's really important to translate those numbers into actual, like, here's an example of what it looks like, and to teach them like how to change within that example, to teach them, like, you know, how to swap different meals in and out, swap different components. Like, I think meal plans can be useful, but not just fighters, actually, anyone can become like a bit of a prisoner to their meal plan. And it says like, okay, you're going to have chicken and rice for lunch or whatever. And they feel like, oh, like, no, I can't have beef, that's not on the plan. But if you swapped like chicken for lean beef or fish or any other lean protein sources, it's more than the same, really. And so I think giving them that foundation scaffolding as the kind of like basis, but also showing them how, like, you can swap this for this, as long as you hit, like, at the end of the day, or even like a weekly average, like, calories are like close to on target, and you're getting close to your protein target each day, then it really doesn't matter that much. So I will give them calorie and macro targets, but I'll put a high emphasis on the calories and protein. And really, like, yes, carbs absolutely are important for fighters. But if someone is hitting their calories and hitting their protein, there are very few scenarios where, like, the remainder of those calories, the distribution between carbs and fats is like way off. And it's like, oh, okay, we need to switch things up. 95% of the time, like, hit calories, hit protein, as long as you're like eating like, you know, a normal human basically, and having balanced meals, you're going to get enough carbs and fats within that. So I think it's a kind of combination of, like, tracking is great because it can help you be a little bit more accurate. But yeah, it's important to translate those numbers into actual foods and full days of eating as well.
I'm glad you mentioned it in terms of, like, hey, give people an example plan. They don't have to stay tied to it. Some people will. They'll be really excited to. Like, it was something I tried when I first started coaching people, was just having them do what they're doing and slightly improve it. But then I found so many people really lost with those steps because they want examples. And, you know, I hear some other coaches saying, oh, you know, we wouldn't get them to eat the diet plan forever. No, it's not the idea. But telling someone just track what they already do is like, well, that doesn't make it easy for them to increase everything and all that. So you give them a rough plan, you realize, because some people legitimately don't know what balance is. And that's kind of the problem, is they don't know what a balanced meal plan is. And I totally agree that for the most part, it's protein and calories. Like, it's just super simple because those things are the necessity, that you have an essential amount of protein to recover. Calories are going to drive the fat loss or weight gain or whatever you're dealing with. I have noticed, though, it's good to do an assessment occasionally on people on fat, surprisingly. And because I have seen some people can be, not fighters as much, but some people can be so driven away from carbs. Actually, some fighters, I have seen that they're so driven away from carbs and eating fattier types of meats that I'm like, whoa. You can't just eat lean ground beef and chicken thighs, because you're only going to have like 120 grams of carbs. Which, like, if we're going to have a training session, you're going to burn through those carbs really quick. And then on the other end, it's like, if you're only eating lean meats, it's like, well, we need hormones. So, I mean, I'm mostly in agreement. It's just, I have noticed once in a while, I need to, like, make sure that we get that minimum 20% fat is the rough kind of percentage I've seen. And then from there, fill it as you need, as long as you have like a minimum of carbs. And I've seen your macro principle, which I really like, the 3-2-1, right? So you go over the 3-2-1 so people have a sense of what that is.
Okay. And just before I do that, yeah, what you said is absolutely spot on. Like, I would class those people in, yeah, like maybe like remaining 5 or 10% of people where you say, like, okay, these are your macros, and I will give them carb and fat targets, but I'll say, look, these are like second priority to calories and protein. And yeah, there absolutely will be cases where, like, I set that as their initial plan. We get to their check-in and they're having, like, let's say they weigh like 60 kilos and they're having like 120 grams of fat and 50 grams of carbs per day. And it's like, okay, if you want to perform well in training, there's a huge room to bring those fats down, and we want to absolutely bump those carbs up. So yeah, it would be like setting that as the initial plan. And then at their check-ins every week, I can see what they're hitting each day, and what their averages for the week are. And if it's like, okay, I've given you calories and protein and the carbs and fats are way off, then okay, we will change that. But yeah, in my experience, like, as long as they're sort of following the plan generally and being relatively similar to the example, the example day, then yeah, those distributions will be pretty fine. But yeah, for the 3-2-1, so this is for fight camp nutrition, so for basically for body fat loss, and it refers to grams of macro per kilogram you weigh. So that would be 3 grams of carbs per kilogram you weigh. So to keep it simple maths, if you're 100 kilograms or 220 pounds, I believe, that would be 300 grams of carbs, 2 grams per kilogram of protein, so 200 grams of protein if you're 100 kilograms, and then 1 gram per kilogram you weigh of fats, 100 grams of fats if you're 100 kilogram body weight. And that will equate to about 29 calories per kilogram you weigh. And that's a good sort of rough, like, finger in the air, like, yeah, sort of testing the waters, a rough sort of rule of thumb for fat loss targets for fighters during camp, where it's like, okay, the carbs are going to be reduced in order as part of the calorie reduction, but not so much that it's going below 3 grams, and below 3 grams per kilogram, it would affect performance more.
Yeah, and for quick mental math for people in freedom units, we're looking at like, almost divide that by 2, roughly, because and it's that, like, I love how you say the finger in the air. It's like, I don't know exactly the miles per hour, but it's like I know which way the wind's going. For the most part, you're going to have, as we mentioned, that minimum of fat, and then I always tell people too, it's like we're going to figure out roughly. I use, a calorie calculator, but I want to see what your metabolism does. I do believe that you need to experiment with it. People's step count can vary. People's ability to lose fat can vary. You can get pretty close on estimations, but at the same time, let's watch the weight loss rate, right? And it can totally vary depending on your activity levels. So I really love that. Those principles are really helpful. I'm curious about what other additional kind of nutritional tips you have for people, or for fighters who are trying to lose weight, trying to get ready, that they might not know. It could be hacks, ideas for appetite, anything like that, like things that fighters are commonly missing.
I think food volume is one. So a lot of times when people try to diet, they will go from their normal diet, which probably includes some nice treat foods, and that's completely cool. And then when they diet, they will either just eat less or switch to, like, very small portions. And yes, while we absolutely do have to reduce calories in order to lose weight, doesn't necessarily mean that the physical amount of food on your plate has to be reduced, because okay, you can like choose leaner meats, you can perhaps slightly reduce your carb portions, and then fill that gap on your plate with vegetables, like fruits and vegetables. I see a lot of fighters like having a lot of like very high protein diets. Like, I don't think fighters really have an issue with protein. Vegetables is actually an area that could use a lot of improvement for a lot of fighters. Like, yeah, they'll be eating like chicken and rice or whatever for all their meals, but that's why they keep going on and off their diet, because it's so boring, and also then not getting the micronutrition from vegetables. And I think like micronutrients like vitamins and minerals are sort of getting a little bit away from the tips now, but are sort of underappreciated for performance. And actually having your micronutrient levels at a sufficient level is going to allow your body to be that like well functioning, well performing kind of machine that you want it to be. So volume would be one. Liquid calories would be another one. And what we're trying to do with these strategies is to try to keep you fuller and reduce hunger, because that's like, that's up there in terms of the sabotages of diets, is hunger. And so liquid calories, like, if you're having like sugar in your coffee or like full fat milk or cream, that could easily be reduced. Even at some point, like if you're having like a lot of like fruit juices or things like that, like full sugar, fizzy drinks like sodas and stuff like that. These are all things where, and alcohol, not like preparing for a fight normally isn't something that like would be an issue for fighters. Like, they normally cut it out at that point. But just generally as well, like, we're trying to reduce these calories, these things that are going to provide you with calories, but not really fill you up. We want to get like a good bang for your buck when it comes to calories. So yeah, volume, reducing liquid calories is an important one. The rate of weight loss, it's not really a diet hack, but that's going to have a huge impact on things as well. Like the difference between losing half a kilogram per week versus 1 kilogram per week, it's going to be like over 500 calories. So a good way to eat 500 calories more each, like be able to eat over 500 calories more each day, is to aim for a slower rate of weight loss. So those would be some important things there. I think those are the top things that come to mind.
That was great. I love that you started with food volume and you hammered vegetables. It was like the biggest thing I even implemented more in my own diet within the last few years was like I just traded up rice for vegetables. It's like I don't even need the rice. Like I have it occasionally, but if I just have a giant bowl of vegetables, it's carbohydrates with a ton of fiber and a ton of nutrients. I don't see like it, provided you enjoy it. Like this is going to be the challenge that I think everyone has to deal with, fighters or non-fighters. You got to find vegetables you enjoy. Like I think like, and this is coming from a kid who didn't eat anything from carrot, like other than carrots till he was fucking 20. Like I didn't eat veggies until I dated a vegetarian and I wanted to impress her and have a salad. I'm like, oh, hey, salad dressing makes a difference. But massive changes. And now I found ways that I enjoy vegetables. And I think it's imperative. But fruit is another one that I always say, fruit is your dessert. Fruit is a thing that comes with those micronutrients, ton of micronutrients, comes with fiber. I try to recommend to my clients, have like strawberries, a kiwi, routinely getting a high dose of vitamin C that's like super impactful with tiny amount of calories. So those are really good tips. I think that's really helpful. I've been actually considering even trying to get my clients to experiment like when they do have protein, like casein protein, because I've heard that that's better as a slow release protein. Whether or not I haven't checked in the literature, but I've understood that that's supposed to help. But I do like those tips. I think those are good. And just coming back to, even though we said in the perfect world, slow weight loss is the ideal, you know, the people got to make that choice. One of the best sentiments I'd heard from my old boss and mentor is the quickest way to burn 500 calories, don't eat it. And it's just like, if you really think about that, so many people would rather burn it. So like, I mean, I'm thinking my fighters, it's like, yeah, they'll do the cardio, which is stupid, but it's that, you know, that unfortunate. I was curious about that. Like, if you get in that stint, do you end up like, have you been in positions where you need to get them to do cardio? How do you kind of accelerate that? Not that we're encouraging it. I was just curious if you ever had to implement that as your weight loss strategy.
Very, very rarely. I can think probably in my like 5-6 years of doing this, maybe like 2 or 3 times where it's been like, okay, calories are already the lowest I would ever like them to go for you. And maybe there is a little bit of room to bump up training. And it wouldn't necessarily always be extra cardio, although like in those like rare cases, sometimes it has been the case. It depends on their training volume, but sometimes it would be increasing steps or something like that, which is gonna, and it depends on the person as well. Some people are like, no, I don't want to spend, you know, an hour walking. I'd rather just smash out half an hour of running, or, you know, cycling, stationary cycling or whatever, and just get it done. And that's completely cool. But the benefit of steps, and with like non-fighter clients, like people who train for fun, they take their training seriously, but they don't want to compete. That is when things like step targets can be really useful, because it can help to increase their daily activity. They can factor it in like throughout their day, and it's not going to have such a fatigue and like impact toll as having to like some forms of extra cardio, like running, for example. If people are having to, you know, do that every day just to burn an extra few hundred calories, it can add up over time. And so, I like steps for that sort of thing. But as a general rule, like a lot of my clients, fighters or non-fighters, are training like pretty much most days. And there's not a ton of room to add in extra cardio. So, and like you said, like it's way easier to eat 500 calories less than it is to go and like it's going to be hard to burn 500 calories. Like it's going to be an intense and like pretty long workout. The other thing I would say is, for people listening, the calories that it says on your treadmill there, I wouldn't put too much faith in them. And like just generally, like pretty much like research has shown that like your Apple Watch, your Garmin, whatever, the calories in pretty much every like calorie calories burned tracker or whatever you want to call it is way off. So that's a whole, like, it's the same issue with body fat as well. Like, okay, like, yeah, you can track it, but do you know if you're anywhere close to the right number? So yeah, generally I wouldn't use that too often with fighters, extra cardio.
Right. And on top of that, it becomes constrained because even though you add that in and your body's going to metabolically adapt it. So you'll burn that and then you'll stop burning it eventually because it's going to constrain it and literally will constrain your amount of your fitness. Like you're not going to be as in shape for your fight. I love the step count. That was another one of the big things that was along with that fiber and the veggies. When I did my bodybuilding show 2 years ago, 4 years ago, I done my first show and horrible weight loss, cardio, didn't track my steps. So I had a fat loss, like a very big slowing of it. And I guarantee you I wasn't moving at all because that's where your body adapts is your non-exercise. And I didn't know that. And then I get into this idea of just like bodybuilders are saying, use your step count. And then we just did step count for 3 months. I lost 30 pounds without literally breaking a sweat. And so that is my number one thing that I get all clients to do, whether it's Gen Pop or fighters, and like maintain your step count. We'll slightly increase it if we have to. The only additional cardio we would do is for like zone 2, if we want your zone 2 cardio to actually come up. But you're always playing this nice dance of, I've heard this said, well, strength conditioning and recovery coach. Like you always want that balance, right? So I'm curious, what additional supplements you recommend for fighters, as I know there are some, that kind of get too embellished out there. Fighters are always curious about the quick tricks, but what are ones that you really recommend for fighters?
Yeah, this is another one where I think fighters fall prey to like social media influencers, kind of, just saying that something is going to be life-changing or whatever. And because that specific person who has said it, looks like they want to look or something like that, they're like, okay, take supplement, look like that guy or girl kind of thing. And that guy or girl also conveniently happens to sell that exact supplement as well, is often the case. So the main supplements for fighters, and as a caveat up front, these are all optional. Like, none of these are essential. If you have like the diet as the sponge and the icing on the cake, then the supplements are just the cherry or the sprinkles on top. Like they really are the last few percentage. But if you do have the financial means to invest in some supplements, these are where your money is going to be best spent. So creatine is great for strength and power. And even research is coming out more recently about cognitive benefits, so in terms of like your just general brain functioning, memory, things like that as well, and also recovery from brain injury, which is obviously very important for fighters as well. So creatine. Caffeine is another one, and that could be from a coffee, as many people drink, or it could be from a caffeine pill for a bit more of like the only issue with coffee is that, like, depending on where you get it from, how you make it, the caffeine in it can vary wildly. So if you want a little bit more of a controlled dose, you could get a caffeine pill. And I mean, most people know the benefits of caffeine, but it helps with like focus, alertness. It reduces your rate of perceived exertion. So it basically makes exercise feel easier, which is always a great thing. The only caveat with caffeine is I would say to avoid that within like at least 6 hours before bed, but ideally more like 8, 10, 12 hours before bed, especially if you notice it affects your sleep quite a lot. We have different rates at which we kind of like metabolize it and clear it out of our system, and so just be aware of the sleep kind of downsides of caffeine potentially. Creatine, caffeine, beta alanine is another one. This is an amino acid, and it's like most often in a powder, but you can get it in capsule forms. And this is a muscular endurance supplement. And so what this basically does is it improves your muscular endurance for activities that last like 1 to 10 minutes. And, a combat sports round, like whether that's like 3 rounds for Muay Thai or boxing or 5 rounds for MMA, falls in that like 1 to 10 minute range. So it basically means like when you're training and you feel that burn kind of increasing in your muscles, it delays the rate at which that happens. So you can train harder for longer before that burn is like, right, okay, slow down. And I should probably take a step back and give doses as well. So creatine would be 5 grams per day. Just take that consistently. No need to load it. Just take 5 grams a day. And that should be creatine monohydrate. There are like other versions of it, but they are at best equally effective, and at worst, downright ineffective. So stick with creatine monohydrate. For caffeine, it's kind of person dependent. If you neck 5 coffees a day, you probably need a higher dose. If you've never even drunk a cup of tea or whatever, then start at the lower end. So start at the lower end. For most people, like 100 milligrams would be a good lower dose, and that's about the amount in like a small self-made coffee, like a self-brewed coffee at home. The pills are often in 200 milligrams, so you can build up to that. Creatine, caffeine, beta-alanine, same dosage as creatine, just 5 grams a day. And just like creatine, the benefits of beta-alanine happen over time. So it's not like caffeine where you take it and 30 minutes later, you're like, right, I'm feeling great. With creatine and beta-alanine, you take it over time for a period of like weeks, and it saturates your stores. So creatine saturates your muscle creatine stores, beta-alanine actually saturates your muscle carnosine stores. It's a bit long to get into, but it takes time to do that. Creatine, caffeine, beta-alanine. So those are largely performance supplements. And then the last few would be health-based supplements. So fish oil, omega-3 fish oil is another one I recommend for a lot of people, especially if they don't consume oily fish, things like salmon or mackerel. Like if they're consuming them less than 3 times weekly, which is a lot of people, then I'd recommend fish oil capsules. And dosage wise, 3 1,000 milligram capsules per day tends to hit the recommended dose of the omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA within those capsules. So 3 capsules of fish oil a day. And then finally, vitamin D, especially if you live in a country where it's not that sunny, or in the winter. I'm from England, where many days of the year it's rainy and cloudy, so definitely didn't get much vitamin D there. And the caveat that I would say is, since I moved to Thailand, I've carried on taking vitamin D, and it's obviously much sunnier here, and I get out in the sun most days. Even with the sunlight and 5,000 IUs of vitamin D per day, my vitamin D levels were still in the normal, like optimal range, but kind of towards the lower end. So I think if I didn't take the vitamin D on top of that, I might even be deficient, despite living in a sunny country. I would just say the caveat that even if you do live in a sunny country, it might still be worth taking, and you can get your vitamin D levels tested by a blood test. And then dosage would be 2,000 to 5,000 IUs, which just stands for international units per day. And that's pretty much it. The only other one would maybe be a multivitamin during dieting. So when you're reducing your food, even if you're consuming lots of fruits and vegetables, the total amount of food and the amount of micronutrients are most likely going to be reduced. And a multivitamin is sort of like it's cheap. It doesn't have to be any of these like expensive ones. Just go to your local pharmacy, get just a standard multivitamin. And it's just like an insurance policy. It's like, okay, if this isn't being covered by the diet, then the multivitamin will sort of plug those gaps. But yeah, a bit of a ramble. But if you're going to buy supplements, those are what you should buy, basically.
I'm on board with all those. I like all of them. I have a couple, like, so the very first one, creatine, for sure. I love that, and I love that more data is coming out. It's like I've actually even realized that even when they're doing like a 5 gram dose, I heard Andy Galpin say, it's like, hey, 5 grams is for like a 150-pound person, titrate that to your body weight. And I was just like, I'm just going to do a heap. So I've been doing more than enough of that. Now more research is like, hey, you can take 10, you can take 20, and it's the cheapest supplement. So that's great news that's coming out. Caffeine, that just makes me feel good because I'm so addicted. But I love that there is, like, people need to understand that it's performance enhancer, and you make a good note of this, like how you use it as a performance enhancer is very important. So it's like, if you're always used to going 400 or 500 milligrams all the time, it's no longer actually effective. Use it for very important sessions, and definitely not at night. I was definitely guilty of a pre-workout at 6, 7, 8 p.m., completely unaware that even though I went to sleep at night, it was affecting my sleep. And so, like, it's super important. I've even seen or heard research that it's like, it should be at least 12 hours for a pre-workout. You can get closer to the 8 to 10, or if it's just regular caffeine, but when you get into the pre-workouts, it just for some reason hits you harder. So those are all really great points. The beta-alanine, I'm really interested in. I messed around with it a little bit as an athlete, but it's kind of like creatine. It's going to be like omega-3s, where it's like, you don't know that you're better, but you're probably better, right? It's just like that investment. And you made a good point, because I had a fighter actually experiment more with sodium bicarbonate because it's cheaper. But you make a good point that it's the GI distress that you have to deal with. So beta alanine is probably your better bet for an athlete, because it's just, you'll get the tingles. I was curious about this. So because my initial paper I remember looking at was like to supplement it throughout the day, like to break up the dose, but you can just take one big dose, deal with the tingles, and then you're kind of done with it.
Yeah. There are two kind of camps, and I used to, recommend like, okay, either you can take like basically like about a 1 gram dose and just split that into 4 little mini doses throughout the day, or what you could do is just take it in one dose. Like, you're gonna feel this like tingling feeling. It's completely harmless, but feels a little bit of weird. So I recommend taking that pre-workout. Like, the tingling, it's tolerable pre-workout. If you're sitting there like at your desk trying to do work and you're feeling like there's like ants crawling in your skin, it can be pretty distracting. And I just, from speaking to my clients, I just found that basically no one was splitting into smaller doses. So I was like, just practically, like, if you do 1 dose per day, you just have one thing to remember per day. Right. Whereas if you have 4 doses per day, it's like 4 things to remember, 4 opportunities to forget it. And yeah, like, if someone was ever like to me, like, oh man, I hate this tingling feeling, I would say like, yeah, let's try splitting it into smaller doses, because then you probably won't get the tingling.
That makes sense. Really cool to know about the vitamin D. I didn't know that even in the sunny states that you're going to want to test. I actually had one of our fighters at our gym recently. He's like, yeah, I couldn't believe how much I was taking, and I still need to increase. So I think that's a good reason for people to go get vitamin and minerals checked. I think that's a really good encouragement. I'll probably do that myself. The other, so the one I find interesting, you didn't mention magnesium. And that's when I hear a lot more strength coaches or nutrition coaches talk about, and because that can be hard in the diet. Do you ever recommend magnesium for some?
Sometimes I would classify. So the things I just listed off there, I would say those are like the A tier, the top tier ones.
Yeah.
And then some things like magnesium, that is one where, like, anecdotally, like, so many fighters who like sign up working together, and I ask them, okay, well, like, what are you taking right now? Magnesium often features in that list.
Right.
And it's one where, like, anecdotally, there's a lot of people taking it. A lot of people feel like it helps them with their sleep. I think the research is like underdone in that, and I'm pretty confident, like, yeah, in the next few years, like, more research will come out, and that might become a staple. Yeah. So it wouldn't necessarily be in those like 5 or however many it was that I would recommend first off. But yeah, there's definitely some merit to it.
Totally. You looked into Rhodiola rosea?
Rosea. Yeah.
Yes, I always get the name wrong.
Yeah, I did. I actually tried it myself one time ago. Personally, and for me, this is the case with a lot of supplements. Like you said, like, you take it, you're sure it's probably giving you a benefit, but apart from caffeine, like, you don't feel the supplements working a lot of the time. And so I didn't necessarily notice a benefit with that personally. That absolutely doesn't mean that it wasn't working. And I was speaking to my friend like not that long ago, and he tried taking it, and he noticed benefits with that as well. And so yeah, that would be another one that's like maybe in the promising category,
yeah,
but isn't a staple in my recommendations yet.
Yeah, I call it like a BC tier. I think that there's something there. The research is pointing towards it. If you have the money, spend it. If you don't worry about it. And then, yeah, I think that's great. Great information. You provided fighters with a lot of info here. I really like it. And I'd love to chat with you again in the future sometime. I want to know one last thing, because it's a Strong Ambition podcast. What is your most recent ambition? You got fights or anything personal, anything? What are you excited coming down the pipeline?
My ambition in my Muay Thai career at the moment is to take it as far as possible, basically. I'm 28 now, so I've still got a few good years left. And yeah, I want to take it as far as I can, accept the most challenging fights, fight the hardest opponents, and just really I just posted about it on Instagram actually, but I had a pretty rough start to my career. I lost 5 fights in a row within my first 10 fights. I tore my ACL as well after quitting my previous job and moving country. And yeah, my record in my first 13 fights was 4 wins and 7 losses, which is pretty rubbish. So I had a rough start to my career, but I'm undefeated in my last 13, 12 wins and 1 loss, one draw. 12 wins, one draw. So I've turned things around, and I want to keep pushing that as far as I can, basically, and just, you know, at the end of the day, be able to look back on things and be proud of what I did.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I tried, probably not as hard as you. You have far more fights than I did. I had the same ambition, because the ambition was always to be a trainer and a nutrition coach, but to know the sport, to get in there, to get your hands dirty, to be able to help them. I would say both career, injuries, concussions, all led to me be like, yeah, maybe it's not my sport anymore. But I think you got to stay in it while you can, like you say. And I always see in fighters, I'm like, stay in it as long as you fucking can, because the moment you step out of this life, it doesn't pull you back in. The only thing that keeps you in the sport is yourself. So I think that's great. I think that's amazing. And I love that you're both the practitioner and the practicer. Like, I mean, you're doing it all. So I think that's incredible. So thanks so much. I'd love to have you on again in the future, but I'll definitely reach out to you in the future when we can, you know, chat some more about nutrition. I got to practice some of this great information you've given me with my fighters. So thanks again, James, and we'll talk again soon.
Yep. Thank you, man.
Thanks so much, James, for that wonderful conversation. I really have a great time talking to people in the sports, around martial arts, appreciating where I've come from, understanding that there's this big gap in the martial art world from traditional values, and appreciating the new scientific research that exists. And especially when it comes to nutrition, it's pretty easy to understand why that stuff applies. It's even harder when it comes to strength and conditioning. But for sure, when it comes to nutrition, there should be things that you can trust. And I do find it's ironically the battle that fighters aren't willing to battle. I had some excellent fighters throughout the years. And as much as they are willing to go for runs, do burpees, do all the hard work, hard sparring, and all that stuff, they're not willing to face the kitchen. And that is a third of the equation. And I've heard this before, and I really always like reiterating the three parts. It is what you do, what you put in you in order to rebuild it, and then the rebuilding process, which is sleep, your training, your nutrition, and your recovery of sleep. So you need to have that piece in order for any of this to make sense. And, you know, really appreciate all the pieces that we discussed of where fighters go wrong. Not knowing what a meal plan is, for starters, it's normal. And I worked with a fighter that once simply just tried to eat less and eat salads. He got sick. He barely made weight, and he didn't win his fight, even though he had the skill to. He definitely had the skill to. And it's a shame, because if you put in all that work, all that conditioning, all those months and days, it's just a matter of more accountability on your own when it comes to nutrition. And that's a life skill. That's something you're going to use after the sport. And also appreciate, you know, once you have that down, there's some of the tips that he gave. Have voluminous foods, making sure that you're having things that are going to make you feel fuller. Don't drink liquid calories. Just appreciate that once you have more nutrient-dense food, it's going to leave you fuller, having enough protein, all the same fat loss tips you hear if you're just any person trying to lose weight. But also really appreciate that the performance thing is something that he kept talking about right off the bat. It's like, if you're just at that appropriate percent of body weight loss, you won't even notice it that much. And that's ideal, because you're trying to perform as you're doing this. When it comes to more everyday fat loss clients, they have to perform cognitively, absolutely. But that doesn't mean it's the same extraneous load that you need as a fighter. But fighters, you got to push yourselves hard. And if you're just at a more severe, I want to say severe, more aggressive deficits, certainly if it's severe, then it's severe on anyone, but definitely if you're a fighter. But just imagine that it's just kind of hard, and you get great training in the process. Because remember, 8 weeks out, let's say that's your fight camp. That's when you're really tied to a mission. That's when it really matters if you recover. And certainly that is when people do their fat loss. But then you should be dialing in that nutrition sooner, so it's just a steady fat loss over time. And as we both described, if we could paint a perfect picture, be at your weight not just 1 week out, 2 to 3 weeks out, and then maintain. Now, not all circumstances are like that, and we are humans. So it's understandable if you can't. But if you really want to get ahead of the game, your fat loss diet strategy, your weight cut actually starts 2 weeks earlier than what you think it needs to. And then you get that more room for error as you go into it. And then from there, we didn't really dive into it too much, but essentially it goes into a water cut protocol, which you should do with a professional. You shouldn't do by yourself, but you would simply manipulate your carbohydrates. And we'll probably do a follow-up podcast, by the way. I'm going to have James on again for sure in the future. And you decrease your carbohydrates gradually. And then you also increase your water by the day up till the day before the fight. And then you drop your water a ton because your body would flush a bunch of weight out. Now, I don't want to say exactly how his protocol is. I can just reference the one I did with my powerlifting coach, and I have some social media posts on it if you're curious of referencing that. But for sure, I recommend you work with someone to do that. Don't just do it on your own, as I even found I needed my powerlifting coach to do mine. He knew exactly when to pull the carbs down. He knew when to add more water in, when's a good time to use diuretics or some slight laxatives like magnesium citrate, whether or not to do heat therapy or heat in order to sweat it out. So you need help with that process to do it safely, because it's also not healthy. Like it's literally dehydrating your body. So you should really have someone to guide you through that process. But it can be done, and you can manipulate a fair bit of your body weight just from that water cutting protocol, and then making sure you rehydrate in time and still have a good performance. I think one of the things I really hope anyone who listens to this gets from it the most, especially if you're a fighter, but anyone, is that weight cutting is hard. The same rules apply. The same tips of more fiber, more voluminous foods, protein. You basically just got to worry about your protein, calories, slight differentiations with carbs and fats, is depending on the person, and some fundamental supplements that we talked about. It's not all crazy. It's just the same hard work. And that it is normal for you to not want to do it. And I think this message can go to both the fighters and an everyday person. We all hate the kitchen. We all hate this battle. None of us like it. But I always say this to every boxing class that I teach when they first time they do boxing. I always say that a fighter is not defined by his or her ability to fight another person. That is only the end of the game. A fighter is defined by the fight that they have within inside them. For days, weeks, months, and sometimes years, they have to fight their inner battle of doubt. The reason to not do something, the reason to not get up and go for a workout, the reason to not do another rep, the reason to not give up anytime they feel the need to. And as I mentioned, even fighters are denying their ability to take on this battle. So if you do want to take the ring serious, you want to take your career serious as an athlete in any sport, and if you are having a hard time as a person who's not trying to be a boxer or a fighter, just be a fighter in this and know that that is a defining character trait. Just battling your instincts around food and nutrition. It's tough. It's literally tough for all of us. So anytime you see professional athletes, those fighters on the stage of the boxing ring or the octagon, wherever it is, know that that's actually a huge part of the battle that they knew they had to sacrifice to get there. And even if you don't want to go get hit by someone else, if you do, you definitely got to do it. And if you want to, I always tell my fighters this when they're preparing for it. If you want to go into that ring feeling confident as possible, you want to control every single variable that you can going into it, because you can't control how much skill your opponent has. You can't even be guaranteed how much skill you acquire. But if you know you owned your nutrition, you showed up for all your training, you tried to study the best you can, and you did all your nutrition, you at least have that much more of a right to feel confident going in. And if you're not trying to be a fighter, not trying to get hit, any of that, just know that this is your day-to-day battle that you can win and still be seeing yourself as a fighter. So I hope my little spiel there inspired you to continue to take your nutrition serious. And if you are a fighter, I don't hesitate you can reach out to myself. I work with fighters locally in Winnipeg, and you can also reach out to James, as he works with people online as well, especially in the sport of Muay Thai. I really appreciate listening. As always, you got this far in the podcast. I appreciate you as a listener. Please leave a review, share it with someone that you know is in the sport or just finds this stuff interesting. But again, I'm just always happy that you're allowing me to let this little podcast grow. So thanks again, because I'm always here to help you chase your own ambition. Because life is not about the pursuit of happiness, but rather the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.